The text message arrived at 4 in the morning, pulling Jakob from a sleep that had taken 3 years of distance to achieve. The number was one he'd deleted 100 times but still recognized, because some patterns get burned into your nervous system deeper than memory. The message contained only coordinates and a single word, Raven. That was the name Martin Cross had given Jakob when he'd recruited him at 22, when Jakob had been angry enough and empty enough to believe that killing for the right reasons was different than killing for the wrong ones. Jakob sat on the edge of his bed in the apartment above the bookstore he now owned in Portland, staring at his phone, and knew with absolute certainty that Martin was dead. The coordinates would lead to something Martin had left behind, and the use of Jakob's old operational name meant the message was authentic, sent through a dead man's switch that activated only if Martin's heartbeat stopped transmitting. Jakob had helped Martin set up that system 7 years ago, back when they were both still in the life, back when they believed preparation could protect you from inevitability. He arrived at the coordinates 18 hours later. A storage facility in Sacramento, Unit 347, paid in advance for the next decade. The key had been taped under a park bench exactly where Martin's coded instructions indicated. Inside the unit, Jakob found a metal case and a folder containing a birth certificate, school records, and photographs of a woman he'd never seen but whose eyes he recognized immediately. She had Martin's eyes. The same gray-green that could look gentle or merciless depending on the angle of light. Her name was Iris Cross. 26 years old. Graduate degree in forensic linguistics from Berkeley. Currently working as a consultant for a private security firm in San Francisco. And according to the documents Martin had left, she had no idea who her father really was. She thought he'd been an import-export consultant who traveled frequently. She thought he'd died of a heart attack 2 weeks ago. She didn't know that her entire existence had been a secret Martin had kept from everyone in his former life, including Jakob, who'd worked with Martin for 8 years and considered him the closest thing to family he'd ever had. The metal case contained 6 envelopes, each sealed with wax and marked with a number. The first envelope held a letter addressed to Jakob in Martin's precise handwriting. If you're reading this, then I failed to protect what matters most. Iris doesn't know about my past, and I spent her entire life trying to keep it that way. But someone found out. Someone who understands that the best way to hurt a man like me isn't to kill him, but to destroy what he loves after he's gone. The envelopes are for her. They contain information she'll need to survive what's coming. But she won't trust them if they come directly from a dead man. She'll dismiss them as paranoia or deception. You need to give them to her, Jakob. You need to make her understand that the danger is real. And you need to keep her alive long enough to learn how to protect herself. I know what I'm asking. I know you left this life to escape exactly this kind of obligation. But you're the only person I trust with this. The only person who understood why I did what I did, even when we disagreed about how. Keep her safe. And if you can, help her forgive me for all the lies I told to keep her innocent. Jakob read the letter 3 times, and with each reading he felt the careful architecture of his retirement crumbling. He'd spent 3 years building a life that had nothing to do with violence. A bookstore that specialized in rare editions and local authors. A routine that involved coffee at the same cafe every morning and chess with the retired professor who lived 2 floors down. He'd even started dating someone, a woman named Claire who taught middle school English and thought Jakob's past was boring corporate consulting work. It wasn't much, but it was clean. It was his. And now Martin was asking him to trade it for the one thing Jakob had sworn he'd never do again, step back into a world where keeping someone alive meant being willing to kill everyone who threatened them. But Martin had saved Jakob's life twice. Once literally, taking a bullet meant for Jakob during a contract in Berlin that had gone catastrophically wrong. And once figuratively, pulling Jakob out of the business 3 years ago when Jakob had been on the edge of becoming something he wouldn't recognize in mirrors. Martin had been the one who told him it was okay to stop, that leaving wasn't weakness, that maybe the strongest thing you could do was admit you were losing yourself and walk away while you still could. Jakob owed him more than he could ever repay. So he drove to San Francisco. Iris Cross lived in a converted warehouse in the Mission District, the kind of place that cost more than Jakob's bookstore made in 6 months. He watched her building for 2 days before making contact, learning her patterns, checking for surveillance, looking for any indication that the threat Martin had warned about was already active. On the third day, he saw them. Two men in a sedan parked across from her building, rotating shifts every 6 hours, professional enough to blend in but not quite careful enough to hide the bulge of concealed weapons or the way their eyes tracked every person entering or leaving Iris's building. Jakob didn't know who they worked for, but he recognized the type. Contract surveillance, probably hired through one of the broker networks that connected people who wanted someone watched with people who were willing to watch them. Which meant whoever wanted Iris had resources and patience, two qualities that made enemies significantly more dangerous. He needed to get her out of that building and somewhere secure before making contact, but doing that without terrifying her or making her call the police required an approach he hadn't used in years. The honest one. He waited until she left for her morning run, the routine she kept 5 days a week at precisely 6:30, and he intercepted her 3 blocks from her apartment, in a pocket park where the surveillance team couldn't see them without exposing their position. "Iris Cross," Jakob said, stepping into her path but keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "My name is Jakob Rayner. I was a friend of your father's. I need 5 minutes of your time to explain something that's going to sound insane, and then you can decide whether to listen or to call the police." She stopped, her body language immediately defensive, keys positioned between her fingers like makeshift weapons. Smart. Martin had trained her without her knowing it, probably teaching her awareness and basic self-defense disguised as father-daughter activities. "I don't know you," she said, her voice steady but her eyes calculating distances and exits. "And my father died 2 weeks ago, so I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." "I know he died," Jakob said. "He left me a message when he did. Instructions to find you and give you something he wanted you to have. But before I can do that, you need to know that there are 2 men watching your apartment right now. They've been there for at least 48 hours. And based on the profile, they're not watching you because they want to protect you." Iris's expression didn't change, but Jakob saw her pupils dilate slightly, the physiological response to adrenaline that couldn't be faked or controlled. "Why should I believe you?" "Because if I wanted to hurt you, we wouldn't be having this conversation in a public park at 6:45 in the morning," Jakob said. "And because your father taught you to trust your instincts about people. So trust them now. I'm not a threat. But the people watching your apartment are." She studied him for a long moment, and Jakob could see her mind working through probabilities and risk assessments. Whatever else Martin had kept from her, he'd taught her how to think tactically. "My father was an import-export consultant," she said. "He had business associates but not friends who show up cryptically in parks talking about surveillance." "Your father was a lot of things," Jakob said. "An import-export consultant was one of the better cover stories. But the truth is more complicated, and explaining it here isn't safe. I have a car 2 blocks away. I can take you somewhere secure, show you what your father left, and answer whatever questions you have. Or you can go back to your apartment and wait to find out what those men want. Your choice." Iris looked at him, then back toward her apartment, then at him again. And Jakob saw the moment she decided to trust her instincts over her comfort. "If you're lying to me," she said, "I will make you regret it in ways you can't imagine." "I believe you," Jakob said. He took her to a safe house Martin had maintained in Oakland, one of 3 locations Martin had kept off the books for emergencies. The house was small, anonymous, and stocked with enough supplies to last a month if necessary. Once they were inside, Jakob gave Iris the first envelope and watched her face as she read her father's words. The letter Martin had written to his daughter was different than the one he'd written to Jakob. It was gentler. More apologetic. But it didn't hide the truth. Martin explained what he'd been, the work he'd done, the people he'd killed. He explained that he'd left that life before Iris was born, that every choice he'd made afterward had been about giving her a different life than the one he'd lived. But he also explained that his past had finally caught up with him, and that the people responsible for his death would come for her next because she was the only leverage they had against information Martin had kept hidden. Iris read the letter twice, her hands shaking by the end, and when she looked up at Jakob her eyes were wet but her voice was controlled. "Is this real? Was my father actually a contract killer?" "Yes," Jakob said, because lying would have been an insult to both of them. And you were too, she said. Yes. Are you still? No, Jakob said. I left 3 years ago. Your father helped me do it. Convinced me that walking away was possible. Iris stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the industrial landscape of Oakland, and Jakob could see her processing information that was rewriting her entire understanding of her life. He taught me self-defense, she said. When I was 12, he enrolled me in Krav Maga. Said every woman should know how to protect herself. I thought it was just normal dad paranoia. Was it? Probably not, Jakob said. Martin was thorough. He would have made sure you had skills without explaining why you needed them. What else did he teach me without me knowing? Iris asked, and there was an edge in her voice that Jakob recognized. Anger. Not at her father, but at the situation. At the violation of discovering her life had been shaped by threats she'd never seen. Probably a lot, Jakob said. But right now, what matters is the information in the other envelopes. Your father said they contain what you need to survive what's coming. We should go through them. The second envelope contained financial information. Account numbers, access codes, and instructions for reaching funds Martin had hidden in banks across 3 countries. Enough money to disappear completely if Iris needed to. The third envelope contained identities. Passports, birth certificates, and driver's licenses for 6 different names, complete with established credit histories and digital footprints. Martin had built escape routes for his daughter the same way he'd built them for himself, preparing for a day he'd hoped would never come. The fourth envelope was different. It contained photographs and dossiers on 5 people, all of them connected to an organization called the Syndicate Meridian. Jakob recognized 2 of the faces. Adrian Koss, a broker who specialized in connecting wealthy clients with solutions to permanent problems. And Vera Chen, a logistics coordinator who'd been responsible for some of the most sophisticated operations Jakob had seen during his years in the business. Both of them were dangerous, but more importantly, both of them were supposed to be retired, same as Jakob and Martin had been. Why are they after me? Iris asked, looking at the photographs with the clinical detachment of someone trying not to feel overwhelmed. I don't know yet, Jakob said. But the 5th envelope might tell us. The 5th envelope was sealed differently than the others. It required a code to open, and Martin's letter indicated that Iris would know the code because it was something only she and Martin had shared. Iris thought for a moment, then entered a sequence of numbers into the electronic lock. The envelope opened, and inside was a single flash drive and a note. The flash drive contains evidence that will destroy Meridian, Martin's note said. Financial records, operational details, and proof of connections to government officials in 7 countries. I compiled this information over 5 years, planning to release it anonymously and permanently dismantle the organization. But before I could, they discovered what I was doing. They killed me to stop the release, but they don't know where the evidence is. They think you have it, Iris, because they found communication between us that I was careless enough to leave unencrypted. They'll come for you until they get it or until they're certain it doesn't exist. The choice is yours. You can destroy this information and hope they believe it's gone. Or you can finish what I started and use it to take them down. Either way, Jakob will help you survive long enough to decide. Iris looked at the flash drive like it was a live grenade. He wants me to finish his revenge plot. I don't think it was revenge, Jakob said. I think he genuinely wanted to dismantle something he'd been part of building. Meridian isn't just a network of contractors. It's a system that's enabled some of the worst things that happen in the world. Assassinations of journalists. Elimination of witnesses. Political murders disguised as accidents. Martin and I did work for them before we understood what they really were. When we figured it out, we both left. But Martin couldn't let it go. He kept digging, kept gathering evidence, because he thought he could actually do something meaningful before he died. And now he wants me to risk my life to finish it, Iris said, and there was bitterness in her voice that Jakob understood completely. No, Jakob said. He's giving you the choice. You can walk away. Destroy the drive. Let Meridian believe it's gone. They might leave you alone. Might. Or you can use it. Release the evidence. Burn them down. But that's a war, Iris. That's choosing to fight people who are very good at making problems disappear. Iris was quiet for a long time, holding the flash drive and staring at nothing. And Jakob watched her, this woman he'd known for 6 hours who carried her father's eyes and apparently his capacity for dangerous decisions, and he felt something shifting in his chest that he hadn't felt in 3 years. Not attraction exactly, though she was beautiful in a way that was complicated by intelligence and intensity. But something closer to recognition. She reminded him of himself at her age, standing at the edge of a choice that would define everything that came after. What would you do? Iris asked. I'd walk away, Jakob said honestly. But I'm not you. And I'm not carrying the weight of finding out my father was murdered trying to do something he thought mattered. So what I'd do isn't relevant. You knew him, Iris said. Better than I apparently did. Do you think he'd want me to finish this? Jakob thought about Martin, about the conversations they'd had during long stakeouts and longer drives between contracts. About the way Martin had talked about justice versus revenge, about leaving the world better than you found it, about trying to balance the scales when you'd spent years tipping them toward darkness. And he thought about the letter Martin had written, the one that gave Iris the choice instead of the obligation. I think he'd want you to survive, Jakob said. Everything else is secondary to that. Iris nodded slowly, then slipped the flash drive into her pocket. The 6th envelope. What's in it? Jakob opened it. Inside was a single photograph of Iris as a child, maybe 5 years old, sitting on Martin's shoulders and laughing at something beyond the camera's frame. On the back, Martin had written, "This is what I was protecting. Not the world. Not justice. Just this. One person's right to laugh without looking over her shoulder. If you're reading this, Iris, know that every choice I made was about trying to give you that freedom. I'm sorry I couldn't finish the job." Iris took the photograph and stared at it for a long time, and Jakob saw tears sliding down her cheeks that she didn't bother to wipe away. And in that moment, sitting in a safe house with a woman whose life had just been demolished by truth, Jakob understood why Martin had asked him to do this. Not because Jakob was the most skilled or the most ruthless. But because Jakob understood what it meant to have your entire identity rewritten by violence and still somehow have to keep living. I need time to think, Iris said finally. Can we stay here tonight? We can stay as long as you need, Jakob said. They spent the next 3 days in the safe house while Iris processed what she'd learned and Jakob monitored Meridian's activity. The surveillance team had expanded from 2 to 6 people, which meant Meridian was escalating. They'd also started making inquiries through Jacob's old contacts, trying to find out who'd taken Iris and where they'd gone. Which meant they knew Jakob was involved, which meant his cover identity in Portland was probably already compromised. Claire had called him 4 times. Jakob hadn't answered. He'd sent a text saying he had a family emergency and would explain when he got back, but he knew that was a lie. He wouldn't be going back. The bookstore, the chess games, the careful construction of a normal life, all of it was burning down the same way it had for Martin, and Jakob felt the familiar weight of inevitability settling over him like weather. On the 4th day, Iris asked Jakob to teach her how to shoot. They went to a private range that Martin had arranged access to years ago, and Jakob walked her through the basics of pistol marksmanship. She was a natural, her hands steady and her focus absolute, and Jakob wondered how much of that was genetics and how much was the forensic training that required similar precision and attention to detail. You're good at this, Jakob said, watching her put 5 rounds into a target center mass at 15 meters. My father taught me, Iris said. Not shooting specifically. But he taught me to focus. To break complex problems into manageable steps. To stay calm when everything's chaotic. I thought he was teaching me professional skills. Turns out he was teaching me survival skills. They're the same thing, Jakob said. In his world. Iris lowered the weapon and looked at him with an expression Jakob couldn't quite read. Why did you leave? 3 years ago. Why did you stop? Jakob had been asked that question before, by other people who'd known him in his previous life, and he'd always deflected or changed the subject. But standing in a shooting range with Martin's daughter, who was trying to decide whether to step into the same darkness her father had spent her lifetime keeping her away from, Jakob found himself answering honestly. Because I was starting to enjoy it, he said. Not the killing itself, but the efficiency. The problem solving. The way everything became clear and simple when you reduced human lives to tactical considerations. I could feel myself becoming something that didn't question anymore. Something that just executed. And I realized that if I didn't stop, there wouldn't be enough of me left to recognize that I'd become a monster. And you think my father felt the same way? Iris asked. I think your father stopped because you existed, Jakob said. He told me once that having you made him unable to lie to himself anymore about what he was doing. That every time he looked at you, he saw the children of the people he'd killed, and he couldn't keep pretending there was a meaningful difference. Iris was quiet for a moment, reloading her weapon with hands that were steadier than they should have been. I want to release the evidence, she said. Not because I think I can fix what my father did. But because if I don't, then everything he was trying to protect me from will just keep happening to other people's daughters. And I can't live with that. That's a declaration of war, Jakob said. Meridian won't just come after you. They'll come after everyone you've ever known. Everyone you've ever cared about. They'll try to isolate you and break you and make you suffer before they kill you, because that's what they do to people who threaten their existence. I know, Iris said. But you'll help me, right? You'll show me how to survive what's coming. And Jakob looked at this woman who'd had 4 days to process the complete destruction of her worldview and had somehow come out the other side with her spine straight and her hands steady, and he felt something in his chest that he hadn't felt since before he'd become Raven. Not just attraction, though that was there now, undeniable and complicated. But something closer to admiration. And maybe hope. That maybe people could be broken by violence and still choose to stand against it. That maybe trying to do the right thing wasn't always naive or futile. Yes, Jakob said. I'll help you. If you're still watching this, if you've made it this far into a story about violence and vengeance and the impossible choices we make when we're trying to honor the dead, then do me a favor and hit that like button. Because this is where everything changes. This is where a retired killer and the daughter of his dead mentor step into a war that will test everything they believe about justice and survival and whether love is something people like them are allowed to have. And you're going to want to see how this unfolds. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Jakob taught Iris everything Martin should have taught her but hadn't, out of love or denial or the hope that she'd never need to know. How to disappear in crowds. How to identify surveillance. How to move through spaces without being remembered. How to kill quickly and quietly if killing became the only option left. And with every lesson, Jakob watched Iris transform from the woman who'd been jogging through San Francisco 2 weeks ago into something harder and sharper, and he felt guilty for being part of that transformation. But he also watched her absorb the training with an intelligence and adaptability that surprised him. She asked questions Martin would have asked. Made connections Jakob hadn't expected her to see. And sometimes, late at night when they were both too wired to sleep, they'd talk about things that had nothing to do with Meridian or survival, and Jakob would learn about the person Iris had been before all this. A woman who loved languages and puzzles. Who'd spent a summer in Istanbul studying Ottoman manuscript preservation. Who made terrible coffee but excellent pasta and could quote entire passages of James Baldwin from memory. And Jakob found himself attracted to her in ways that went beyond physical, though that was there too, unavoidable in the proximity and intensity of their situation. He was attracted to her mind, to the way she thought about problems. To her refusal to be a victim even when she'd earned the right. To the way she looked at him sometimes, like she could see past the careful walls he'd built and wasn't afraid of what was underneath. But she was Martin's daughter. And she was under Jacob's protection. And the power dynamic made any relationship between them deeply problematic at best and exploitative at worst. So Jakob kept his distance, maintained professionalism, and tried to ignore the way his heart rate increased when she stood too close or smiled at one of his rare jokes. On day 16, they released the evidence. Not through traditional channels, which Meridian could have suppressed or discredited, but through a decentralized network of journalists and activists who'd been waiting for something like this. Within 6 hours, the information was everywhere. Financial records showing Meridian's connections to 7 different governments. Operational details of assassinations that had changed elections and toppled regimes. Names and faces of people who'd thought they were untouchable. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 senators resigned within 24 hours. 2 corporate executives disappeared before they could be arrested. And Meridian, the organization that had existed in shadows for 30 years, suddenly found itself exposed to light that would either burn it to ash or force it to retreat so deep underground it might never resurface. But exposure didn't mean safety. If anything, it meant escalation. Meridian's remaining leadership would be desperate now, cornered and dangerous, and cornered predators were when they were most likely to attack regardless of cost. Jakob knew they'd come. The only question was when and how many. They came on day 18. 6 operatives, professional and coordinated, hitting the safe house at 3 in the morning when most people's reflexes were slowest. But Jakob hadn't been sleeping, and neither had Iris, both of them too experienced now to believe that releasing the evidence would end the threat. They prepared for this, rehearsed it, and when the first operative breached the front door, Jakob and Iris were already moving through an exit Martin had built into the house's foundation, a tunnel that led to a garage 2 blocks away. They made it to the garage, but the operatives were faster than Jakob had calculated, cutting off their primary escape route. Jakob killed 2 of them, quick and efficient, the muscle memory returning as if he'd never stopped. Iris killed 1, the shot clean and centered, and Jakob felt pride and horror in equal measure. The remaining 3 fell back, regrouping, and Jakob knew they had maybe 90 seconds before reinforcements arrived. The motorcycle, Iris said, pointing to a vintage Ducati that Martin had kept in the garage for emergencies. Can we make it? We have to try, Jakob said. They made it. Barely. Jakob drove while Iris sat behind him, her arms around his waist, and they tore through Oakland's pre-dawn streets with 3 vehicles in pursuit. The chase lasted 17 minutes, ending only when Jakob took a route through the port of Oakland that his pursuers couldn't follow without exposing themselves to port security cameras. They abandoned the motorcycle in Berkeley and went to ground in a motel that rented rooms with cash and didn't ask questions. In the motel room, adrenaline still flooding their systems, Iris looked at Jakob with an expression that was part fear, part exhilaration, and part something else entirely. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved mine too," Jakob said. "That shot you took was perfect." "My father would be proud," Iris said, and her voice broke slightly on the words. "And horrified. I killed someone tonight. A person with a name and a history and people who'll miss them. And I feel terrible about it. But I also don't regret it because they were trying to kill us." "Is that normal?" "There's no normal in this," Jakob said. "But what you're feeling makes you human. The day you stop feeling terrible is the day you should worry." Iris moved closer, closing the space between them, and Jakob felt his heart hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the chase they'd just survived. "Jakob," she said. "I know this is complicated. I know you think there's a power imbalance or that you're taking advantage or that my father would disapprove. But I need you to know something. I'm attracted to you. Not because you're protecting me or because I'm traumatized or because I'm confusing fear for something else. But because you're brilliant and damaged and trying desperately to be better than what you were made to be. And I see you. Really see you. And I like what I see." Jakob wanted to tell her all the reasons this was a bad idea. That she deserved someone who didn't have 17 kills on his conscience. That the intensity of their situation was distorting her perception. That he was 17 years older and still figuring out how to be a person instead of a weapon. But looking at her, seeing the certainty in her eyes and the steadiness of her hands and the way she'd stepped into violence without losing herself, all those reasons felt like excuses. "Your father was my best friend," Jakob said. "And he trusted me to keep you safe. Not to." "My father's dead," Iris said, and there was pain in her voice but also clarity. And I'm grateful he sent you. But I'm not his daughter right now. I'm just Iris. A woman who's choosing to feel something other than fear and grief. And I'm choosing you. If you want that. Jakob did want it. More than he'd wanted anything in years. And maybe that made him selfish. Maybe it made him the kind of person who took advantage of vulnerability and proximity. But it also made him human. Capable of wanting connection and intimacy and the possibility that maybe he wasn't permanently broken. He kissed her. And she kissed him back. And for a few hours in a cheap motel room while Meridian's remaining operatives searched the city for them, they were just two people trying to find comfort in each other's humanity. The next morning, reality reasserted itself. They had to keep moving. Meridian was wounded but not dead, and wounded organizations were unpredictable. Jakob's contacts indicated that Meridian's leadership was fracturing, different factions arguing about whether to cut losses or escalate retaliation. Which meant there was a window, maybe a narrow one, where they could negotiate or at least establish terms that might let them survive. Jakob reached out to the one person he thought might be willing to talk, Adrian Koss, the broker he'd recognized from Martin's files. Koss was pragmatic, the kind of person who understood that destroying your enemy sometimes cost more than learning to coexist with them. They met in a neutral location, a coffee shop in San Rafael where both parties could see all exits and neither had tactical advantage. Koss was exactly as Jakob remembered him, 50s, well-dressed, the kind of calm that came from decades of navigating dangerous waters. He sat across from Jakob and Iris and studied them both with the detached curiosity of someone evaluating livestock. Martin's daughter, Koss said to Iris. You have your father's eyes. And apparently his talent for making my life complicated. Good, Iris said. My father spent 5 years compiling evidence to destroy your organization. The least I can do is finish what he started. You've already done that, Koss said. The information you released has damaged us severely. 7 governments are investigating connections. 12 clients have severed contracts. 4 of our senior operatives are in custody. Meridian as it existed is functionally dead. So congratulations. You won. Then why are you still trying to kill us? Jakob asked. I'm not, Koss said. I'm trying to survive. There are factions within what's left of Meridian who want revenge regardless of cost. But there are also people like me who understand that revenge is expensive and pointless. Your father disrupted our business model. You've ensured we can't operate the way we used to. But that doesn't mean we have to keep fighting until everyone's dead. What are you proposing? Iris asked. A truce, Koss said. We stop trying to kill you. You stop releasing information. Whatever else your father gathered, whatever else you've learned, it stays buried. And we all move on with our lives. And I'm supposed to trust that? Iris asked. No, Koss said. You're supposed to understand that it's in both our interests. You've already destroyed the organization your father wanted destroyed. Anything beyond that is just bloodshed for the sake of bloodshed. And from what I understand about Martin Cross, that's not what he wanted for you. Iris looked at Jakob, and Jakob saw the question in her eyes. Was this legitimate? Could they trust it? And Jakob, who'd spent 11 years in this world and knew how these negotiations worked, honestly didn't know. Koss could be sincere. Or he could be buying time while Meridian's revenge faction regrouped. There was no way to be certain. We'll consider it, Jakob said. But we need guarantees. Something more substantial than your word. I can offer you this, Koss said. I'll provide you with names and locations of the remaining faction members who want you dead. You can eliminate them or avoid them, your choice. And in exchange, you don't release whatever else you're holding. That seems like a fair trade. Your safety for our discretion. He slid a flash drive across the table. Jakob took it, knowing he'd have to verify everything on it before trusting any of the information. But if it was legitimate, it was more than he'd expected to get from this meeting. Why are you doing this? Iris asked. Why help us? Because Martin Cross was a professional, Koss said. And professionals recognize when a fight is over. He taught you well, whether he meant to or not. You've proven you can survive in this world. I'd rather have you as a neutral party than an active enemy. He stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Your father's death. It wasn't Meridian. Not officially. It was a private contract from someone within our organization acting independently. We've since dealt with that person. Martin deserved better than being killed by someone breaking protocol. I can't give you his life back. But I can tell you that the person responsible won't be killing anyone else. He left, and Jakob and Iris sat in the coffee shop for a long time, processing what had just happened. A truce. The possibility of survival. The chance to stop running and maybe build something that resembled a life. Do you believe him? Iris asked. I don't know, Jakob said. But I believe he's telling the truth about Meridian being fractured. And I believe that continuing to fight costs him more than making peace. Whether that's enough to trust him, I can't say. So what do we do? Jakob looked at her, this woman who'd been thrust into a war she didn't ask for and had somehow come out the other side still standing, and he realized the answer wasn't his to give. It's your choice, he said. Your father left you that evidence. You're the one who gets to decide what to do with it. Iris was quiet for a long time, staring at the flash drive Koss had left. I want it to be over, she said finally. I want to stop being afraid every time I walk down a street or hear a car door close. I want to go back to my life, or whatever's left of it. But I also don't want to betray what my father died trying to do. Your father died trying to protect you, Jakob said. Everything else was secondary. If you choose to stop fighting, if you choose survival over vengeance, I think he'd understand that. I think he'd want that for you. And what about you? Iris asked. What do you want? Jakob thought about his bookstore in Portland, which he'd probably never see again. About Claire, who'd stopped calling after he'd been gone for 3 weeks without explanation. About the careful life he'd built that had been destroyed the moment Martin's dead man's switch activated. And he thought about the last 3 weeks with Iris, the intensity and danger and the strange intimacy that came from surviving things together. I want you to have the choice your father tried to give you, Jakob said. To live without violence. To build something that isn't defined by what you're running from. And if you'll let me, I want to help you do that. And what about us? Iris asked. What we started last night. Is that real? Or is it just trauma and adrenaline? I don't know, Jakob said honestly. But I want to find out. When we're not running. When we're not afraid. When we have time to figure out who we are when violence isn't forcing us to be something we're not. Iris nodded, and Jakob saw relief in her expression, or maybe hope, or maybe just exhaustion. Okay, she said. Let's take the truce. Let's verify Koss's information. And if it's legitimate, let's stop fighting. Let's try to build something that isn't about survival. They spent the next week verifying the information on Koss's flash drive. Every name checked out. Every location was accurate. And one by one, the members of Meridian's revenge faction were either arrested by authorities who'd finally started taking the leaked information seriously, or they disappeared, presumably eliminated by Koss's own people who'd decided peace was more profitable than war. By day 32 since Martin's death, the threat had diminished to something manageable. Not eliminated completely, because threats like this never disappeared entirely, but reduced to the level of background radiation rather than imminent danger. Jakob and Iris could walk down streets without checking every reflection. Could sleep without weapons within reach. Could start thinking about futures instead of just surviving the present. They decided to leave California. Too many memories, too many ghosts. Jakob suggested Portland, but Iris wanted somewhere neither of them had history. They settled on Asheville, North Carolina. A city small enough to feel manageable but large enough to disappear into. Mountains nearby. Good food. The kind of place where people asked fewer questions and accepted more complexity. Jacob bought a small house with cash from the accounts Martin had left for emergencies. Nothing fancy. Just a place with a porch and a yard and enough space for both of them to breathe. Iris started consulting work again, using one of the clean identities Martin had created, helping law enforcement agencies analyze communication patterns in criminal networks. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, that she was now using skills her father had taught her to help catch people who did what her father used to do. And Jacob tried to figure out how to be a person again. He planted a garden, which felt absurd for someone who'd spent 11 years killing people, but there was something honest about putting things in soil and watching them grow instead of always destroying. He started running in the mornings, not to maintain tactical fitness but just to move and think and exist in his body without it being a weapon. And he tried to be present with Iris, to build something with her that wasn't founded on fear and survival. 6 months after they moved to Asheville, Iris asked Jacob a question that he'd been avoiding thinking about. "Do you think we'd be together if none of this had happened?" she asked. They were on the porch, watching autumn light turn the mountains colors that didn't seem possible. "If my father hadn't died. If you hadn't been forced to protect me. If we'd just met at a coffee shop or through friends. Would you have looked at me twice?" Jacob thought about that. About the careful life he'd built in Portland. About Claire and the chess games and the bookstore and how all of that had felt safe but also somehow hollow. About whether he'd have been brave enough to let someone see who he really was if circumstances hadn't forced it. "I don't know," he said. "Maybe not. I was pretty committed to being boring. To keeping everyone at a distance where they couldn't see the parts of me that were damaged." "And now?" Iris asked. "Now I think maybe being boring isn't the same as being safe," Jacob said. "And maybe letting someone see your damage is less dangerous than pretending you don't have any." Iris was quiet for a moment, then said something that Jacob felt like a knife between his ribs in the best possible way. "I love you. Not because you saved my life or because we survived something terrible together. But because you're trying so hard to be good when it would be easier to be terrible. And that trying matters to me more than whether you succeed." Jacob had been in love before, or thought he had, back before he'd become Raven, before he'd learned to kill without hesitation. But this felt different. Not despite the violence and complexity, but somehow because of it. Because they'd both seen each other at their worst and their most vulnerable, and they'd chosen each other anyway. "I love you too," Jacob said. And it felt like the most dangerous thing he'd ever admitted, more terrifying than any contract or confrontation, because loving someone meant giving them the power to destroy you in ways bullets couldn't. They sat on that porch as the light faded and the mountains went dark, and Jacob thought about Martin, who'd died trying to protect what mattered most. Who'd trusted Jacob with the only thing that had ever meant more to him than his own survival. And Jacob hoped, wherever Martin was, if there was anything after death for people like them, that he could see what his daughter had become. Not because of him, but in spite of him. Strong and brilliant and choosing to build something instead of just destroying. 1 year after Martin's death, Jacob received an email from an address he didn't recognize. The message was brief: "The truce holds. Meridian is gone. What remains is something different, something smaller. You and Iris are no longer targets. But you should know that others are asking questions about Martin's evidence. About what else he might have gathered that hasn't been released. I've contained those questions for now. But I can't contain them forever. Eventually, someone will come looking. When they do, you'll need to decide what you're willing to do to protect what you've built. Choose wisely. K." Jacob showed the email to Iris, and they sat together reading it 3 times, each time feeling the weight of what it meant. The past wasn't gone. It was just sleeping. And eventually it would wake up and demand answers to questions they'd been avoiding. "There's more evidence," Iris said. "On the original flash drive my father left. Information he didn't include in what we released. About operations that are still active. People who are still making decisions that destroy lives. He held it back because releasing everything would have been suicide. But it's still there. And someone knows it exists," Jacob said. "Eventually they'll find us," Iris said. "And they'll ask for it. Or they'll try to take it. And we'll have to choose whether to give it to them or fight to protect it or release it ourselves and start this whole thing over again. They sat in silence, and Jakob thought about the garden he'd planted, which was probably the most normal thing he'd ever done. About the life they'd built, which felt fragile and precious and completely inadequate to protect against what was coming. About the fact that violence never really ended, it just paused, waiting for the next person to pick it up and carry it forward. "What would your father want you to do?" Jakob asked. "He'd want me to destroy it," Iris said. "To choose safety over justice. To live the life he tried to give me." "And what do you want to do?" Iris looked at him, and Jakob saw the same conflict in her eyes that he felt in his own chest. The desire to be done with violence. To live peacefully. To pretend that the information didn't exist and the questions would eventually stop being asked. But also the knowledge that pretending didn't make something untrue. That the information represented real operations destroying real lives. And that choosing comfort over action was itself a moral choice. "I don't know," Iris said. "If we release it, we put ourselves back in danger. We destroy whatever peace we've managed to build. But if we don't release it, people die. Not people we know. Not people we can see. But people whose lives matter just as much as ours. And I don't know how to live with either choice." Jakob thought about the targets he'd killed during his 11 years as Raven. The faces he still saw sometimes when he closed his eyes. The weight of knowing that every one of them had been someone's father or daughter or friend, and that his efficiency in ending their lives had created grief that spread like ripples in ways he'd never see. And he thought about the choice Martin had given Iris, which was really the choice Martin had been trying to make for himself, whether trying to fix what you'd broken mattered more than protecting the people you loved. "We don't have to decide today," Jakob said. "But eventually we will. And when we do, whatever you choose, I'll stand with you. If you want to release it and fight, I'll fight. If you want to destroy it and hide, I'll hide. Your father trusted me to keep you safe. But safe doesn't just mean physically alive. It means having the agency to make your own choices about what kind of person you want to be. Even if my choice gets us both killed?" Iris asked. "Even then," Jakob said. They went inside, and Jakob made dinner while Iris worked on a case that had nothing to do with Meridian or her father or the weight of inherited violence. And for a few hours they were just two people sharing a meal, talking about ordinary things, existing in a space that felt almost normal. But underneath that normalcy, the question remained, unanswered and unavoidable. If you have information that could save lives but releasing it would destroy your own, what do you do? If you're finally safe but others aren't, do you have an obligation to risk that safety? And if the person you love makes a choice that you disagree with but that comes from the best parts of who they are, do you support them even when it terrifies you? Jakob didn't have answers. Neither did Iris. They just had each other, and a flash drive full of secrets, and the knowledge that eventually, probably sooner than they wanted, they'd have to choose between the life they'd built and the lives they could save if they were willing to destroy everything again. And if you've made it all the way to the end of this story, if you've watched these two people try to figure out how to be good when the world keeps asking them to be violent, then I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button. Because this is where I leave you with the same question Jakob and Iris are facing. Not because I have the answer, but because I think the question matters. When the past comes calling and demands you choose between your peace and someone else's survival, what do you do? When loving someone means supporting choices that scare you, how do you balance care with honesty? And when you've finally built something worth protecting, at what point does protecting it become selfishness instead of survival? I want to hear what you think. Drop your answer in the comments below. If you were Iris, would you release the remaining evidence even if it meant putting yourself and Jakob back in danger? Or would you destroy it and choose the peace you fought so hard to build? There's no right answer. But your answer says something about who you are and what you value. So tell me. I'll be reading every comment. And maybe together we can figure out what the hell any of us are supposed to do when the world asks us to choose between being safe and being good. Until next time, remember that the stories we tell ourselves about who we are matter less than the choices we make when no one's watching. Choose carefully. Choose honestly. And choose knowing that whatever you pick, you'll have to live with it. Just like Jacob and Iris. Just like all of us.